From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. More Idaho Matters right now. Last Thursday, President Trump signed an executive order instructing the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This is the private nonprofit that serves as the steward of the funding to public media to cease federal funding for PBS and NPR. Now, since this news broke, we have had many folks reach out wanting to know what this means for the future of their local NPR stations. Our general manager, Tom Michael, has been following all of these developments very closely, and he is joining us live in studio now to talk more about this. Tom, appreciate you taking time out of your schedule.
You bet. Good to be with you, Gemma.
So, Tom, can we talk about numbers first? How much of our funding here at Boise State Public Radio comes directly from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting?
Sure. Each year it's about 15 to 20%. And you can go onto our website and look at those numbers, Boise State Public Radio /funding. But our annual community service grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is about $600,000. So to be exact, $591,171. I just pulled the number. But on top of that, we occasionally get programming grants. One is for the Mountain West News Bureau that we currently have, and that's $250,000 to help us prop that up. So that's pretty significant.
So, Tom, can you talk to us exactly about what the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is? As I said, it's the steward, basically, that gives out these grants. But it can be a bit confusing for people to understand these terms, especially when we turn everything into acronyms.
Right, it is true. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, so it's an independent nonprofit that distributes federal dollars. It was born out of the 1967 Public Broadcasting Act of Congress, so that's 58 years ago. And it established the system for public TV, public television, Sesame Street, Outdoor Idaho, all those great things, and public radio, NPR, American Public Media, this program. And the total appropriation each year is currently about $500 million. And it's kind of small dollars in the grand scheme of things. That relates to about $1.60 per taxpayer. So, over the last 50 to 60 years, there's been debates, and there should be. We're all open to debates about how public fees should be spent. But it's been an incredible private-public partnership. It's allowed our station, for example, to expand from just a little Boise station to one that serves a lot of Idaho.
Talk a little bit more, Tom, about this private-public partnership and really the power of the government in terms of this.
Sure. So in regards to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, by the way, it's always been bipartisan. Its board members are nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. A full board term runs 6 years. So there are Trump appointees on that board from the first term. There's Biden appointees on that board. It's long been this political balance. And public media reaches 99.7% of the nation. So we're non-commercial, like we said. So we have this mission of public service. So there might not be a commercial reason, a commercial return on investment to be in towns like Cambridge or Burley or Stanley. But we're there. We're in Salmon. We're in Chalice. We're in McCall. We're in Ketchum. And, our listeners know these are towns of less than 2,000 people, many of them. And yet it's important for us to serve these areas because it's part of our mission of, quote, universal service.
So, Tom, you mentioned, not a return on investment for commercial stations, whether we're talking television, radio, print, to be in a lot of these smaller communities. And this isn't just unique to Idaho. This is across the country. There are news deserts across the country where the only place that people can daily get any type of information, whether it's news, whether it's emergency information, is through local NPR stations. As you mentioned, that's why we have transmitters all over the state. Can you talk a little bit more about this? And I know it's a part of the mission of public radio, but also the necessity of this outside of the news.
Oh, you bet. So we have several services. One is news. The other is just fine arts, classical, music, and other things. And this is the emergency alert system is something that is set up throughout the country on broadcast stations. And on our main channels, we're a source for national alerts, and it's called the EAS, the Emergency Alert System, and we're considered a local primary for Southwest Idaho. So what that means is that our stations, KBSU, KBSX, KBSK, KBSQ, KBSM, all feed smaller stations in those areas. So if there is severe weather, wildfires, national emergencies, we have a mission to carry this message, not just from our stations, but to other stations that may be in the area. And I'll give you a personal example. I mean, we could point to the Four Corners fire outside of Cascade. We can point to the Bench Lakes fire outside of Stanley. I heard our hosts on the air, issuing evacuation orders, I'm sharing evacuation orders from Valley County Sheriff, et cetera. But another example, just last summer, it was mid-July. I was near Little Payette Lake camping with family. It's outside of McCall. Something flashed on my daughter's phone, and she's like, "Dad, it sounds bad." And I went to a news site, and I couldn't load it. I just saw something that said assassination attempt, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what is going on?" So we were all kind of panicked, and I get back in the vehicle, and boom, we have news service where we don't have cell phone service. Of course, I was talking about the Butler, Pennsylvania assassination attempt on then candidate Trump. But in the times of emergency and crisis and big news, it was a living example of how where electricity and cell phone coverage doesn't reach, broadcast often reaches.
And I think that's such an interesting point, Tom, right? Because I think we live in a time right now where there is an assumption that if you have a phone, you can get the news, you can get those emergency alerts, right? And that is not necessarily the case, because in the middle of the woods in Idaho or in a small town in Idaho, you may not have access to great Wi-Fi.
Well, and you've covered it on this program.
Right?
Exactly. You've covered it on this program many times about broadband access throughout Idaho. And it's not just about Boise State Public Radio. Let me mention another public broadcaster, KIYE. Daniel Spalding is one of the hosts in Lapwai, Idaho, and it's on the Nez Perce Reservation. And he does amazing cultural programming, like language lessons for the Nimipu up on Nez Perce Reservation. Over 50% of their funding comes from the Corporation of Public Broadcasting. It's not a very wealthy community. And so this allows stations like that to thrive that are very important, culturally.
Okay, I don't want to sit here and just pat ourselves on the back, Tom, because I do think it's worth having debate and discussion about not just the necessity of public broadcasting, but why should taxpayer dollars be used for NPR, for public television? Because I think there are people who support these entities that question, why should we take money from the government? Why should there be any funding coming from the government?
I agree. It's worthy of debate. We should absolutely debate these things. What kind of country do we want is ultimately the question. So we did talk about rural coverage, and we talked about the other thing. Public media is one of the last locally managed media organizations in the country. We are locally owned and locally operated. Our license is held by the State Board of Education. Our mission is non-commercial. But in many ways, government is involved, right? Sometimes it's grants, sometimes it's fees, sometimes it's discounts. This is the Doctors Roundtable Day. So let me make a quick point about public-private investment. Think about how much work goes into being a doctor. It takes high school, then 4 years of college, often federal grants and loans, then medical school, sometimes that's a public medical school, grants and loans, then 5 years in residency, sometimes some of it is subsidized by Medicare and grants. So on a community level, here in the United States, we've invested in making great doctors. For public media, for every dollar into the system, public media leverages another $7 to $8 privately. So that public-private partnership with just a little bit of seed money allows us to do great things, allows us to serve more people. And if you think about public television, for example, that whole host of children's programmings, educating our nation's youth, that's a really important mission.
Right. And I have to say, my kids loved PBS Kids when they were little, and so did I, frankly. Tom, I want to talk about this idea of bias. This is not a new concept. It is not exclusive to public media. I think that this is a an argument, a debate that's been going on ever since I've been in this industry, at least. And that is the fact that the media is biased towards the left. And that is an argument that is being made within the Trump administration right now. How do you respond to that criticism?
Yeah, I don't see that. I see our reporters with fact-based coverage doing timely topics, both national and local, affecting all Americans. We put people's voices on the air. It's a non-commercial model that allows us to provide this thoughtful stuff. But don't take my word for it. You can go look at studies. For example, there is a study called Ad Fontes that looks at all media, dozens of media, and they look at NPR and PBS, and they put it high among the trusted scale, and they also put it in the center of that scale that goes from left to right. According to a national survey, public television is one of America's most trusted institutions for over 20 consecutive years. So there's always going to be this political football, but I encourage people, as they listen, to understand and know that we're dedicated to balanced news, public affairs programming that encourages back and forth conversations.
Tom, I have about 1 minute left with you. So this is just an executive order. Congress actually appropriates money. However, that doesn't mean that this whole situation is safe and funding will not be taken away. So what steps are next? What can folks do if they're interested in learning more?
Yeah, I want our listeners to know this website, protectmypublicmedia.org. We are watching whether a rescission budget comes through. Even in the regular budget process, they're going to debate. Our Idaho congressman will debate public funding for public media. So I hope people can watch along, but thanks so much for this opportunity, Gemma.
Well, we appreciate you coming in, Tom, and explaining more about this and how it all works. We've been speaking with our Boise State Public Radio General Manager, Tom Michael. We've been talking about last week's executive order calling for funding to be cut to both NPR and PBS and what that could mean for our listeners. And again, Tom said, take a look at that website, Protect Public Media. And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Thanks so much for listening. And just a reminder, you can find all of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.